In this video, I'm going to tell you about how the tabletop wargaming industry and the music industry are actually quite a bit alike. Just a note, this is gonna not quite be a rant and not quite be a ramble, hopefully. It'll be maybe kind of a rantamble. I just made that up. So I get messages quite frequently, comments, tweets, all kinds of emails, whatever, from people saying, hey, why do you always seem to focus on the popular games? Why don't you ever talk about the indie stuff? Just things along that nature. Sometimes, a little bit more unhappy, and sometimes just actually a general question. Number one, I do talk about some indie stuff. I talk about Song of Blades and Heroes, which is about as indie as you can get because it's made by one guy in Italy. And I also talk about Wreckage. It's one of my also favorite skirmish games, made by two guys, one of them being moderator Matt, down in Chicago area. Post-apocalyptic skirmish, very DIY. But I do talk a lot about the more popular games as well. And there's a reason for this. The reason is because the popular games are kind of what brings people into the hobby. Just like, and here comes the music thing, when you first started out listening to music, you most likely were listening to pop music, which is short for popular music. I looked it up. And what that does is the popular stuff, when I was a kid, my first albums were like Thriller by Michael Jackson, Sports by Huey Lewis and the News, that kind of stuff, which was popular, got lots of radio play. But at that time, there was plenty of independent music going on, most likely, but I didn't know about it because I was just getting into music. Most folks don't get into wargaming by jumping into the indie games. Some do, don't get me wrong. Right now there's a 12-year-old whose first game ever was DBA and is putting it in the comments right below, which is fine. But the general kind of public, most of us start with the more popular games because you can find players more easily, you can find the product in stores more easily. Admittedly, now in this day and age, we can go online and find all kinds of things and order things and get them sent to our house from small indie companies that can't get distribution. But we can also do that with music. See how I'm going there? There's lots of indie music out there that is very good, but is hard to find because they don't get to play a lot of shows out. They don't have an agent. They don't have a company that, produces their records and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of where these two mediums, both wargaming and music, sort of mimic each other. Now, again, like I said, when you're first starting out in music, someone is generally not going to, at the age of 8 or whatever, give you some very difficult music. You're not looking at extreme metal like doomcore or sludge or stuff like that. I've got a friend who owns a small record label called Gilead Media, and he produces lots of stuff like that. And he also has his own record shop where he sells those albums, but he also sells, used albums and new albums and more popular stuff. But the focus at his place is this more indie, difficult music. When he first opened up, actually, the slogan underneath the bags said difficult music for difficult people, which was kind of a thing. It was funny. I thought it was funny. He thought it was funny. But the fact is that difficult music is difficult, and that's why you generally don't start that way. Just like in wargaming, very indie, kind of underproduced, not a lot of cool artwork, but maybe super tight, really important, very well done rules. That's sometimes difficult for you to do on your first trip. So what do? You stick with games that are a little bit more mainstream. And the trick is there's nothing wrong. People will, point and laugh at pop music, but pop music makes a ton of money. Talk to, like Taylor Swift, I suppose. She probably makes a ton of money. Talk to, Games Workshop. They make a ton of money. So popular stuff doesn't inherently make it bad, and it is almost always, if you're getting into whatever that hobby might be, a good place to start. Another little thing I want to touch on here. The stuff that I talk about generally on the channel is stuff that I play myself. This is not a news channel, so I don't talk about all the new releases. I don't just talk about all kinds of different games, because if I don't play them, I find it personally to be disingenuous, because me talking about a game that I don't play, or at least maybe haven't even barely read, seems false. I like to talk about the stuff that does two things. Number one, I enjoy. And number two, brings new players into the hobby, which is why I talk about the popular games that a new player can find pretty much anywhere. They can find opponents pretty much anywhere. Music's kind of like that too, and that's where these things, again, like I said, kind of converge. You have this idea of popular music, what's on the radio, what's in all of the local stores in your mall, if you still have a mall around you or whatever. And those things are really what can help get you into music. It's what it did for me, probably did it for a lot of you. But as you grow older, you still have some appreciation for the popular stuff generally that you liked, but you then, as you get older, you get into some indie stuff, and some of the stuff that you liked when you were younger, you maybe don't like as much. This is just known as growth as a human. As you grow, your tastes change. And I think it's wrong for people to kind of take that whole idea of like, well, it's not my taste, so therefore it's wrong, as something that is real. Whether it's in wargaming or whether it's in music, there's a lot of people out there that are like, well, this is garbage and this is bad and whatever. And it doesn't really make a lot of sense to do that. I know why people do it. I did a video about it years ago about why we dislike other people's decisions. Pachow. And really, basically, it kind of comes sometimes from a place of fear because, well, if people like that and I don't like it, but they don't like the thing that I seem to like, well, then I must be wrong. But that's not the case. People like what they like, and that's the way it works. So the whole point really is that if you are looking at the tabletop wargaming industry as there are popular games that nearly anybody plays, almost, it's the majority of the people seem to play it, but then there's also maybe like the very niche indie game that you like a lot, and your kind of sadness to the whole thing is that, man, this is a really great game, but nobody seems to play it because they don't have the marketing budget and the artwork budget and the modeling budget and all that stuff, and I really wish more people would play it. Well, in that situation, just like in music, it kind of comes up to you to sort of make that move and to tell people about it. Play your music that you like for your friends and go, hey, this is really cool. I discovered this recently, and maybe some of them will like it as well. It's the same way with gaming. And I've talked about that all before too. If you want to get a game that is small and niche, less niche, in your local area, it becomes your kind of prerogative to make that happen. It's best if you are doing it with some sort of skirmish game because it's easy to have two small armies versus two huge armies, because you're going to need the two armies if you're going to, set up across the table from somebody at the local shop and say, hey, why don't you come over and play? I've got an army here for you to use. If it's 5, 6, 7, 8 guys, that's easy. But if it is a huge army game, some sort of big, huge historical thing, that may be a little bit more difficult. Music's got the leg up in that situation because all you have to do is just point the music at them and play it if they're interested, and then they can go, oh yeah, that's cool, and then they can decide to buy it or not. We always sort of have this hill we have to climb with getting new people into the hobby, where if we're going to get into the hobby, they kind of have to make some investments and kind of go that direction. Music doesn't really have that as much, so that's kind of where the analogy breaks down. So I hope my rantamble spawned analogy of, between the music industry and the tabletop wargaming industry, I hope it's made some sense to you. My main point, I guess, is that I'm trying to tell you that there are the big popular games out there, just like there's the big popular music out there, and it may not necessarily be for you, and that's fine because there's plenty of indie out there, and the indie stuff is much easier to find now than it was back before the internet, so it puts us in a good spot. That's also the same for music. There's plenty of popular music, and then there's plenty of indie music, which again is easier to find because of the internet. The trick is to, in my mind, not get angry with other people's choices, and to also focus on, if you're interested, getting other people interested in your choice. If you have some sort of small indie game that is not carried at your local shop, talk to your friends about it. Maybe bring in 2 armies so that you and your friend that you've talked to about it can sit down and play. Maybe you'll get them interested. Maybe you'll get 2 or 3 people interested. Maybe you'll get 5 people interested. Maybe your local shop will start to carry that stuff. It's up to you to be able to kind of get those people interested in that stuff. Just like in any good music genre, there's always people who kind of drive that and show their friends and take their friends to shows and all that kind of stuff, and then spread that word as well. Again, like I said, the trick is that if you really want to get wargamers involved in some smaller indie game, then there's an investment involved that is more than just, say, buying some iTunes songs or some CDs or whatever it is the kids do these days. But it takes work to be able to do that. And to sit down and say, well, I only want to play this because it's popular. If that's what you want to do, that's cool. But think about the indie stuff as well, certainly. But don't poo-poo the big popular stuff because it's popular. There's a reason that stuff's popular. And to some degree, it's because that company spent a whole bunch of marketing money and but it's also they had to get there. Almost never does a game company come up out of nowhere. Just like all of a sudden a musician never comes up out of nowhere and then just becomes a big scene thing and has longevity. Longevity is also the big deal. There are companies out there that are popular and also have been popular for a long time, and that should tell you something. So find what you like, spread it around, and don't worry about if it's popular or if it's indie or if it's popular music or indie music, and just enjoy what you enjoy.